happiness, and good times, y'all. Welcome to Ralph Reads, brought to you by TURN, the United Ronin Networks. My name is Ralph Anthony Garcia, also known as R4, the legal, the loyal, the regal, the royal Ronin Ralph, your master of ceremonies. Please like, share, comment, join, subscribe, tell a friend to tune in to TURN, the United Ronin Networks. We are Ronin. Today on Ralph Reads, we proceed on the adventure Kenyatta's Escape, written by Al C. Clarke, better known as Donald Goines. You already know what it is. You just never know where the persona non grata Kenyatta or his crew will go. The suspense and silence before and after the violence. Let the reading commence. Chapter 8. Detective Benson walked around the airport slowly, waiting on the call that would let him know that his flight was ready. His partner, Detective Ryan, had parked himself inside the bar and hadn't come out. Their evening flight had been canceled because of a flash storm. As he thought about their trip, his name was called out over the intercom. He rushed back toward the departing ramp that they were to use. Ryan met him there. "Damn," Benson said as his partner came running up. "I'm surprised to see that you can still make it around on your own power." Ryan cursed loudly. "If you call this my own power, you're not aware of the power of the 4 Horsemen." Both men laughed as they walked out toward the private airplane that was waiting to take them west. Each man carried his own suitcase and an overnight bag.
"Our big chief didn't call with any last-minute advice, did he?"
Ryan inquired. "Hell, if you didn't receive any calls, Ryan, I don't know why in the you should think I did," Benson stated as they neared the airplane. Before they went aboard, 3 well-dressed men came hurrying up. All of them seemed to be in their late 20s. One of them removed a federal badge from his pocket and introduced the men to each other.
"My most commonly used name is Carl,"
he said by way of introduction.
"but these other 2 gentlemen like it more formal. The tall one is Evans, and the blonde-headed guy is Stevenson. In case you forget the right pronunciation, just call him Steve."
The 5 law enforcement officers shook hands all around. Benson was surprised at the youth of the federal man called Evans. He appeared to be just barely 21, but from past experience, Benson knew he must be a good man or he wouldn't be assigned to this case. After the 5 officers boarded the airplane, the men removed their coats and made themselves as comfortable as possible. Long holsters hung down from each man's shoulder. The federal man, who called himself Carl, wore 238 police specials hung from specially built holsters. The young, attractive stewardess who waited on the men was shocked at first by so much hardware. But before the airplane left the ground, she had become accustomed to the sight of the weapons. She knew that they were federal men, so the sight of the weapons hadn't shocked her that much. "Benson," Stevenson called out, "we hear you and your partner are damn near experts on this militant organization. Is that true?" Benson shook his head. "I don't know what you mean by experts, but we do know the people we are after a little better than most policemen."
"Good. That's damn good,"
Stevenson stated and removed some small sketches from his briefcase.
"We have some pictures here that we took at the airport. It would be of great help to us if you and your partner could put some names on a few of these damn people."
Before Benson could look at the pictures, Evans spoke up.
They had a hidden camera out at the airport that took a few of our prey without their being aware of it. So when you finish there, maybe you could glance at these I have.
Ryan and Benson both laughed as they started to go over the pictures together. Suddenly, the stewardess announced that they were about to take off, so everybody was to fasten their seatbelts. The two partners sat back beside each other and continued to go over the pictures as the jet began its takeoff. In seconds, the fast-moving jet was in the air. The stewardess came around, passing out drinks. When Ryan started to reach for one, Benson stopped him.
Ben, if I needed a wet nurse, I'd have asked Davidson to send one along.
Even after having spoken sharply to his partner, Ryan didn't take a drink off the small tray. He had faith in his partner's judgment. Ryan knew he had a weakness for strong drink, so it came in handy having a friend around to slow him down at times. There was not much they could do about identifying the people in the pictures. The only ones they were sure of were Kenyatta and his woman Betty. The pictures of the other blacks they had to pass on.
Well,
Carl said as he took the pictures into his lap and stared at them.
It was some help. At least we know what Kenyatta's woman's name is now. We had already placed that woman as being his from what people had said, and also from the way the cameras picked them up at the airport. We believe each man was walking beside his own woman, yet we can't be sure of anything. These are the most dangerous people in this country at the moment. We have been given the green light, so anything goes, just as long as we bring them in.
The other federal men nodded their heads in agreement. All of them had the same orders. Kill the militants at the first chance, and don't take any chances. As soon as Carl fell silent, the youthful-looking Evans spoke up.
It's cases like this that I hate. I don't care what a person has done. I just despise the idea that I have an open license to kill them on sight. That,
Stevenson said.
People like this really need to be killed. Take the shootout at that farmhouse yesterday.
He nodded at Ryan.
From what I hear, you and your partner were there, right?
Ryan nodded his head in agreement, then took a quick glance out of the corner of his eye to see how his partner was taking it.
Okay then, you guys were out there. Do you think it was justified the way they had to destroy those creeps? I mean, Jesus Christ, they killed 7 cops. So what the are you going to do? Play tiddlywinks with a bunch of ruthless killers like that?
It was one hell of a shootout, Ryan answered, then added,
As far as what's right or what's wrong, I'm in no position to answer that. I just do what I have to do.
From the tone of the voice he used, the federal man got the message that Ryan did not want to talk about it. The black man sitting next to him had turned his head and was looking out the window as if the question wasn't interesting enough for him. Stevenson decided to let the matter drop as he wondered what the hell was eating these 2 men. The other 2 federal men had also gotten the message. This was a subject that neither detective seemed to want to talk about. Carl, who was the federal man in charge of the group, thought about the matter for a few minutes, then reapproached the subject from another angle.
I don't like to bring up things that are unpleasant,
he began.
But from the reactions of you two when the subject was mentioned, it seems as though you might have some hang-ups about this that we don't know about.
He fell silent, then added,
Now, if it didn't have anything to do with the case, I'd just let the matter drop. But it's too important. Our very lives might depend on the way you two react to a given situation, so we might as well get the air clear on this matter.
Before Ryan could say anything, Benson spoke up. The hang-up is not on my partner's part. It's on mine. I didn't like the idea of using tanks to blow them out, even after we had lost a few men. It was cold-blooded murder to me, Benson said, then added, but as far as hang-ups, we don't have any. We were responsible for the bust that went down at the farmhouse. If it hadn't been for our work, there never would have been a shootout. So I felt kind of bad because I knew in my heart that it wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for me. A lot of people were wiped out at the farmhouse, not just policemen, he stated icily.
Yeah,
Was the only thing Carl could say. He ran his hands through his long, wavy black hair as his mind skipped over the trouble. Here was a black detective, a good one, true enough, but one who hated to see his people killed. He would have to give this matter a lot of thought before he made his report back, Carl reflected coldly.
Well,
Ryan thought as he listened to his partner.
It had been a good assignment as long as it lasted.
He had no doubts about the matter. He believed the young federal man will report back that Benson wasn't up to the job ahead, and if they took Benson off, he wanted off too.
Well, gentlemen,
Ryan said quietly.
You asked my partner, and he told you. Whatever he said, you can bet that I feel the same way. So whatever your thoughts are on the matter, don't just think that it's him. Put me right beside him, because whichever way he goes, I go the same way. So it's like that, huh?
Carl asked before anybody else could say anything. The jet hit an air pocket, and the airplane did a deep dip that made all of them clutch at their seats.
That's beautiful,
Evans said.
How long have you two guys been working with each other?
Ryan smiled, then replied,
It's been over 10 years, but that's not the case either. Though Benson saved my life yesterday, that still wouldn't make any difference if I thought he was wrong. But in this case, I don't. Tanks were brought in, and the people who tried to surrender were shot down. I know how he felt about it because I feel the same way. I don't care what the person has done. Once his hands or her hands are in the air, you're supposed to take them alive. Well now, that puts a different slant on the thing altogether. I didn't know it had gone down like that,
Carl replied.
But since you made it very clear, I'm going to forget all about this little conversation.
As soon as he finished speaking, he laid his head back and pretended as if he had fallen asleep. The rest of the detectives started doing the same thing, while Benson continued to stare out the window. The law enforcement officers hadn't been airborne a good 2 hours when the stewardess came back.
I have a radio message for Mr. Carlton Saunders.
Right over here, miss.
Carl called out. The stewardess gave Carl a folded note. Carl quickly opened it and scanned the message. His brows seemed to come together as he concentrated on what he was reading.
Gentlemen,
He began, waiting to make sure he had everyone's undivided attention.
we have a slight problem on our hands. A little more information on the whereabouts of our murderers.
He glanced around at all the interested faces, then continued.
It seemed that Kenyatta and his gang ran into a little trouble. The airplane that they had taken control of was forced to land on the Nevada desert. From the information that I have here, the passengers have been reached. Now our problem is whether or not it will be worth our time to stop and talk to the passengers or keep on.
He held his hand to cut off the questions, then added,
Now we were on our way to Los Angeles, but now we might just have to change our plans. I believe we might be able to gain some kind of information from the stranded passengers, so I think it would be beneficial to our pursuit if we talk with some of them. It doesn't seem as if we would be going out of our way if we stopped. Hell,
Evans stated.
it's not much difference from Los Angeles, to any parts of Nevada, as long as we don't get lost on one of the reservations.
He ended lamely and chuckled at his own joke.
What part of the desert did they land on?
Ryan asked abruptly.
Right out of Las Vegas,
Carl replied.
Now, if no one objects, I'll go up front and have the pilot land in Las Vegas instead of going on to California. As we speak to the passengers, we just might come up with something that might help. Somebody on that damn plane might have overheard something that could be important to us. You never can tell,
Stevenson said as Carl got up and started toward the front of the plane. The officers began to speak among themselves. They wondered if this might not be the break they needed. Benson hoped silently that it was. He thought about his wife and hoped that this assignment wouldn't keep him away from her too long. He was getting too old to stay away months at a time. Maybe 10 or 15 years ago, it might have been okay, but not now. Benson valued the quiet evenings he spent at home with his wife, or at least valued the evenings he used to spend with her, until he got caught up on his damn case. Each officer seemed to be reflected on the federal agent's statement. If Carl was right, and they did get a break out of talking to the passengers, it would solve a lot of problems for everyone. When Carl came back from the radio room, he wore a serious expression. He sat down and began to curse.
Damn it. We have got to bring these murdering motherfuckers to Earth. They shot up the airplane, killing hell, I don't know how many passengers. It must have been one hell of a shootout because they lost 2 of their people. They want us to go straight to the place when we arrive and see if we can't help to identify the 2 black militants who were killed. It seemed there are some rumors running around about one of the dead blacks being Kenyatta. I don't think we could be that lucky though. But since they don't have any prints on the man, it's up to us to let them know if they have our man.
Somehow, Benson knew before ever seeing that body that it wouldn't be Kenyatta. It was just a case of all blacks looking alike, as far as he was concerned. All blacks looking alike was something whites were quick to assume. Yet, it seemed to Benson that blacks were easier to tell apart than any of the long-hairs he came in contact with. Because of the long hair, he reasoned, most whites had something in common. In another hour, the pilot was instructing them to fasten their seatbelts. The airplane had hardly touched down when 2 cars began to run alongside. Benson stared out at the racing cars. Boy, oh boy, he said. Somebody mighty damn important must be aboard this plane. He glanced at the other members and they smiled.
It's not that,
Evans said jokingly.
They just don't want to make any mistakes and make sure you guys aren't sneaking in any of that northern fruit.
The men laughed easily among themselves. The strain had been broken, and now they felt as if they all had something in common. They were a working team, like a small combat unit that had to depend on just itself against the enemy. As soon as the plane dropped, the men were at the door. They didn't waste any time departing from the airplane. An elderly, heavy-set, red-faced man got out of the lead car and approached them. He flipped open his wallet and revealed his badge.
I'm Billings,
he stated in a husky voice.
I'm supposed to show you boys around.
He readjusted the large white cowboy hat he wore. Then he took a quick glance out of the corner of his eyes as the tall black officer shifted one of his bags around. The man was surprised to see Benson with the group, but tried not to reveal it. His orders had been to pick up some big-wheel federal men at the airport and show them around any parts of the city of Las Vegas as they thought fit to see. but he had never imagined a black man being in the group.
The first thing we'd like to do is see the bodies of the blacks who were killed on the plane. After that, we'd like to question as many of the passengers as we can,
Carl said.
Well, I believe all of that can be arranged without too much difficulty. The passengers haven't arrived yet, but by the time we finish at the morgue, they should have arrived. Oh, they haven't gotten the passengers back from the plane yet?
Evans asked. The Las Vegas federal man was as much surprised by the babyface Evans as he was by seeing the Negro in the group. He stammered, but managed to ask,
I'd like to see some kind of identification from at least one of you gents.
He was stuttering profusely.
It's these damn rules.
Billings alibied.
You guys know what I mean.
He smiled broadly, letting them know that he knew that they were all right, but he was just going by the book. Carl, a good judge of character, knew why the man suddenly asked for proof of who they were, but didn't mind. He removed his wallet as they started for the cars and flipped it back, revealing the badge.
Don't let it worry you,
Carl answered as he smiled back at the man, putting him at ease.
We had better use both cars. There's no reason for us to be all crammed up in one car, is there?
Billings inquired. Ryan was visibly relieved about not having a ride piled up in one car. He veered over toward the rear car, and Benson followed with Evans right on his heels. The three men got into the second car and relaxed. The white driver was another middle-aged police officer. Benson wondered idly if they had any young officers on the force. This one also wore a large white Stetson hat.
I'm Gary,
the man said, introducing himself. He was tall and thin with a gaunt face. His cheeks were hollow, as though he didn't have any back teeth. The three men introduced themselves, one at a time, until everybody in the car knew each other by name. Gary turned on the air conditioner in the car.
I hope this air doesn't bother any of you, but the heat out here gets so intense at times that a person has to have an air conditioner damn near everywhere he goes.
Gary fell in behind the other car that was being driven by Officer Billings. The two cars picked up speed as soon as they left the crowded airport. Soon there was nothing but arid sand and tumbleweeds rolling along the sandy floor of the desert. How long do you think it will be, Gary, before they get all the passengers off the desert? Benson asked. Gary glanced in the mirror to see who he was, to see who he was speaking with.
Oh, I don't know, boy. It shouldn't take too long because they sent 3 large helicopters out to pick them up,
Gary stated, drawing the words out with a heavy Texas accent. Benson had took the only course he thought he had. If he was going to have to work with these hillbillies, he swore he'd be damned before he'd allow them to talk to him as if he was some young-ass punk they had just picked up. By the way, Gary, Benson began, I don't know if you have a hearing problem or what, but I'll tell you once again, my name is Benson. That's Benson. Ben for short. Now, if you should have any f***ing trouble remembering it, just try calling me Mister until your mind works right.
By God, boy,
Gary began, but this time Ryan cut him off.
The name the officer gave you was Benson, Gary. If you have any more trouble remembering it, maybe we get back to your headquarters, we'll be able to find a driver who has a better memory.
Ryan's voice was so cold that there was no doubt in anyone's mind whether or not he would follow up the threat. He would report the officer, and Gary knew that he would be taken off the big case immediately. These other officers had been shipped a long way because of this case, so their voice would be heard, and when they ever decided to say anything. The first car pulled up in front of a modern building. As the people in the first car got out, the second one pulled up. Benson got out and waited for Ryan to reach him on the sidewalk. Again, Evans came hurrying up. Benson smiled at the younger man. Ryan and Benson could tell that Evans had taken a liking to them. He had begun to hang around them like a shadow. Gary approached them.
"Well, we might as well go in,"
he said. When there was no reply, he just led the way toward the front entrance. It didn't take long before they had caught up with the other members of the group. They followed an employee of the morgue down a flight of stone stairs. They made a right turn, and they were standing in front of a secluded room. The attendant opened the door and led the way inside. Lying out in the middle of the floor on different slabs were two bodies. One, a black male, the other, a black woman. Benson and Ryan stepped forward and stared down at the pair. "Violence breeds violence," Ben said quietly, then turned to his partner. "At least they got to go out at the same time," he stated as he studied the two cold bodies in front of him. "I'd say it's Zeke and his woman. What's her name, Ryan?" he asked, bringing his partner into the picture and taking the spotlight off himself. Ryan frowned. He knew Benson knew who the woman was and what her name was.
"If I remember correct, Ben, her name was Ann Jackson, or something like that. But there's no doubt about it. That's Zeke laying there. Kenyatta will miss him. This is one of his best flunkies." "Well, I guess that's that,"
Carl said quietly from beside the two detectives.
"Now that we have a make on them, that's two of the bastards we won't have to worry about anymore. Let's not speak ill of the dead,"
Evans said, trying to relieve some of the tension on the black officer.
"We'll get about the dead down there,"
Billings asked coldly as the men started back toward the doorway.
"These are the kinds of places that always gives me the creeps,"
Stevenson said, really depressed because of the morgue. As Benson followed after the rest of the men, he wondered if he was overly self-conscious. He imagined that maybe at times there were situations he came in contact with only because of his color. If he hadn't been the black man, many of the things that happened while he was working on a case wouldn't have happened. No matter how he looked at it, there was no getting around it. Even with a partner who abhorred any form of discrimination, he still found himself overly responsive to any forms of racial bigotry.
"Why the shit are you dragging your ass like a hound dog with fleas?"
Ryan said, breaking the reflective mood Benson had fallen into. "Damn, I didn't know I was that transparent," Benson answered as he fell into step beside Ryan. The two men went down the stairway that led back onto the streets. Evans and their driver were already inside the car waiting on the two detectives. As Benson and Ryan got in, the first car pulled away from the curb. "What now?" Benson asked as he settled back in the rear seat.
"I think we're on our way to meet the unfortunate passengers. By the time we get through grilling them, their asses will be glad to get aboard another damn airplane,"
Ryan said, before removing his pack of smokes from his pocket. "Damn," he cursed as he balled up the empty pack and tossed it out the window. "You better watch yourself, Mac. You could get a f***ing littering ticket for less shit than that in this state," Benson said jokingly. For some reason, the younger detective, Evans, had fallen into a reflective mood. He stared out of the car window from the passenger side in the front seat. Suddenly, he broke the silence and stated what was bothering him.
"That young black girl back there, it was obvious,"
he began.
"She had been a very pretty woman."
He got his thoughts together before continuing.
"Just what the hell has a f***ing nut like this Kenyatta got that can make people like her follow him?"
When nobody answered the question, he went on.
"I mean, I've read her dossier, and she was above average. Ann was her first name, I believe, and would you believe it? The broad had 3 years of college under her belt.
Warming up to his subject, Evans twisted around in his seat and stared at the two men in back of him.
It just beats the shit out of me, really. Here, this young, attractive girl has been to college, so she's not a ghetto child who had never seen what the other side looks like. Her people saved and planned to send their daughter through college. Then she has the bad luck to run into some creep like this fucking Kenyatta and blows the whole ball of wax.
It was evident from the tone of voice Evans used that the man was sincere about what he was saying. He really felt sorry for the girl back in the morgue.
I'll just never be able to understand it,
he finished quietly.
This kid had everything life could offer her. Looks, brains, a hell of a body on her. Yet, she tosses everything away to follow this fucking lunatic Kenyatta. She must not have been too smart,
Gary said. Benson gritted his teeth. Just the sound of the hillbilly's voice got on his nerves. He knew that the best thing in the world for him would be to solve this case and get the hell back where he belonged. If Gary and Billings were any indication of what the federal officers would be like out west, he realized that he was in for one hell of a sorry time. Savagely, he bit down on the cigarette he was smoking. Before the men could go any further with the subject, Gary pulled into what appeared to be a closed-in parking area. Only when they were inside could you tell it was for government men and other law enforcement agencies. Police cars, unmarked and running the mill from cheap Fords up to late-model Cadillacs, were parked everywhere. Signs were everywhere also, stating that parking in certain areas was for police cars only. After Gary found a parking spot close to the elevator, the men piled out. Carl and Stevenson were waiting for their arrival. Again, Billings led the way. Taking the elevator upward, the men rode in silence. 3 hours later, the 4 out-of-town federal agents sat around a conference table. The men compared the information they had received from the passengers. Each man had a pad and pencil in front of him, and every now and then one of them would make a note on his pad.
Well,
Ryan said quietly,
that was the damnedest 3 hours of wasted time we'll have to mark down and hope it never happens again. I wouldn't say that,
Stevens said quickly.
I realize we didn't get anything firm to go on, but now we do have an accurate count of the people we're chasing. Before, we didn't really know how many it was, and at least we know they were out of that ranch.
Big deal, Ryan said in disgust. The consequence of the day was wearing him down. He seemed to be drowsy or just fed up, and it was evident in his bearing.
Now just hold on there,
Carl said lightly.
We can't afford to let little setbacks wear us down. This case isn't going to be busted overnight, so we might as well just make our minds up to the fact that it's going to be one of those cases that takes plenty damn endurance. Getting down on each other will not help a damn thing. So from now on, I don't want to hear anybody knocking another officer. You guys understand?
He stared around at the 3 officers in his charge.
Good,
he stated, then continued.
From what I can gather, either Kenyatta and his people are here in Las Vegas, or they've gone to Los Angeles.
I'll buy that, Benson said. I believe they pushed on towards Los Angeles. From what the people from the ranch said, I get the feeling that Kenyatta was trying to set up the impression that he was coming to Las Vegas. But from what I know of the man, Los Angeles will be more to his liking. For the next half hour, each detective offered his thoughts on the case. They had just about discussed every possible maneuver that Kenyatta and his small group could have made. Finally, Carl took his time and folded up a large map he had spread out on the round conference table.
Now,
Carl began,
as the officer in charge of this small unit, I think this will be our best bet. It's not going to take all of us to stay here and check out whatever leads might come in, so we're going to split our forces. 2 of us will stay here for a couple of days, while the other 3 go on to California. I've already made arrangements. An airplane is waiting to fly some of you guys out of here.
That sounds great to me.
Stevenson said.
I figured it would.
Carl answered.
That's why I picked you to stay here with me, Steve.
He glanced over at Evans.
Now it's up to you. I'm sure that Ryan and Benson would rather go on, so I'm sending them on ahead. If you want to stay and work with us, Evans, that will be fine. If you'd rather go on with the other two men, that's fine also. It's your choice.
A large smile broke out on Evans' face.
Hey, man, that's just great. Hollywood, here I come. Hell's bells, Carl. You never can tell. By the time you guys get around to arriving in Los Angeles, I might have been discovered by some lucky producer. Damn, man, can't you see it? Can't you just see it now? Cop turns to acting. Big hit everywhere with the broads.
The men laughed good-naturedly. Then Carl stood up.
Okay, then that's settled. Ryan, I'm putting you in charge of your group. You guys have...
He took a second and glanced at his watch.
Just about 30 minutes before your plane leaves. It's not a private airplane, but an unscheduled flight. This flight was set up to take as many passengers from the hijacked airplane that want to go. So you guys will see some faces you have met earlier. You just might get a tip. Who knows? Maybe one of the passengers will remember something they had forgotten, and when they see you guys just sitting there, they'll walk over and give you the big tip that will bust this case wide open. Oh, hell yes,
Evans said.
That's the only way it could go. After all, this is the West Coast, and things happen out here in strange ways.
You guys don't me none, Benson said, falling into the move of trivial conversation. You've been scheming ever since we left Michigan on how you could arrange it so that you'd have a chance to stay in Las Vegas and try and break one of the casinos. Carl put on a convincing act of surprise.
Now I know why they call you one of Detroit's finest. Who else but a real detective could have sniffed out my intentions? Of course I'm going to bust one of them gambling tables open. This is my chance to put my foolproof system to work.
The other man laughed as they stood up. They all shook hands as they wished each other good luck.
Okay, guys,
Carl said as everybody prepared to leave.
If by chance you do get a lead on these f***ing nuts, don't take any chances. No shit. Now, we all know how dangerous our prey is, so use all the damn caution possible and then some. I'll give an amen to that,
Ryan said as each federal man prepared to leave. There was no telling when they would meet each other again, but one thing was for sure. Each agent believed in his heart that Kenyatta's days were numbered. Chapter 9. On the south side of Chicago, on a busy side street, a travel-weary station wagon sat parked and abandoned. The people who had left the car would not have any use for it anymore. Now that they had reached their destination, they watched nothing that might link them to Detroit, and the Michigan license plates on the car would draw suspicion at once. 6 blocks away, there was an old, dilapidated building that had a sign outside reading, "Private, Club Members Only," in large red letters. The building had once been painted a loud yellow, but age and dirt had been to work, so now it was a dusty-colored, dingy yellow. The few windows in the front of the building had long ago given up any pretense of being glass. Now, old rotting wood covered the window frames. Even upstairs where some sort of light seemed to exist. A Coke bottle sat on the windowsill upstairs, holding up an aging window frame that was now covered with dirty plastic. The inside of the building was the complete opposite. The floor was covered with carpet, old carpet that had seen better days, but carpet that had been kept up. The rug was of a dark brown color with dashes of red evenly spaced throughout. The furniture was similar to the carpet, old but expensive. Someone had spent money a long time ago for the few pieces sitting around. The couch and chair were French provincial, the coloring an odd shade of gold. The coffee table was marble topped, while both end tables were matching pieces of marble. In the dining room, there was an old dining set, table and chairs, with a late-model china cabinet. Each of the two rooms, front room and dining room, were extra large. In the rear of the upstairs flat, the bedrooms faced each other. Besides the bathroom, there were 4 bedrooms. Dickie, relaxing in the chair in the front room, watched the television out of the corner of his eye. His mind was not on what he was watching as he tried to listen to his host. "So you're pretty sure that was Kenyatta that took off that airplane, huh?" he asked a short, dark man sitting on a couch.
"Yeah,"
Tiny answered.
"It ain't no doubt about it. They flashed some of their pictures earlier, so I know what I'm talking about."
Dickie fell silent, letting the man's words sink in. It was really something to think about. If Kenyatta took the airplane, and there seemed to be no doubt about it, Dickie would have to accept it. But what really was on his mind was whether or not Kenyatta knew about the raid jumping off at the farmhouse. If he had known about that, it meant that Kenyatta had intentionally tossed the rest of his people to the dogs while he made his escape. "I wonder," Dickie said, no longer able to hold back what was on his mind, "if Kenyatta really knew about the bus going down at that farmhouse."
"Oh man,"
Tiny replied quickly.
"No way. You don't think our main man would be that funky, do you?"
It's one hell of a thought.
Peggy said quietly.
I mean, the way everything went down, it gives a person room to think.
Tiny wouldn't accept it.
"Nah, baby. It ain't no way possible for him to think like that. I mean, if he was up on it, it wouldn't have taken but a minute for him to have wired somebody up so that everybody else would know the pigs were on the way."
Tiny shook his head.
"Hey man, I know you and your people have had a hell of a time, but please keep your mind clean. This just ain't no way to think."
Dickie wouldn't be put off that easily.
"Hey Tiny, I ain't knocking the man, but I have to look at both sides of the coin. If I find out Kenyatta knew about the bust, he gonna have big trouble out of me."
Tiny rolled his eyes.
"I mean, my man, you ain't got no reason to think like that. If you had any grounds for what you're saying, I dig it. But from what you said, why do you think Kenyatta did what you think he did?"
"Why?" Dickie almost yelled. "Shit, man. Why in the hell did they rip off an airplane and didn't pull none of our coats that they were going? From the radio, it sounded like they were trying to take the plane out of the damn country, but just had a bad break."
"Well, man, I don't know what to tell you,"
Tiny stated, then added,
"but I'll bet money if Kenyatta finds out the farm was hit, he'll be calling here. This joint have been just sitting here waiting for the day it would be put into use, like now."
Tiny answered sharply. Victor entered the conversation for the first time. His woman, Irene, sat quietly beside him.
"I don't know what's jumping off, but I'm like Dickie. I want to know why they ripped the plane off without asking any of us to go along with them. Maybe the man didn't know what was going to jump off until it was too late,"
Tiny said, still trying hard to defend Kenyatta's actions.
"Yeah, man, that ain't good enough,"
Dickie replied sharply.
"Ain't no way I'm going to believe Ken and Zeke and the rest of them went out to the airport and instantly decided to hijack a plane. It had to be planned."
Okay, Tiny said, holding his hands up.
"I'm going along with that much of it. But that other ish, I can't buy it on no kind of level." "You don't have to buy it,"
Victor stated coldly.
"If you have been in the shootout at the farm, you'd be wanting some kind of answers yourself. But as it is, you were sitting here watching all that shit on television, so you don't know how hard it was." "Hey man,"
Tiny said quickly,
"just wait a minute. I was cool with 2 main people that got killed at that farm, so I ain't taking nothing lightly. But on the other hand, I just can't buy that about Kenyatta knowing the pigs were coming. When you guys find out something a person can really go along with, then pull my coat and I'll help you run down Kenyatta."
"It ain't no case of running them down," Dickie said coldly, then added, "'cause we know damn near where we'll hold up in Los Angeles. Just like we knew to come here. We also know where the hideout is on the coast.
I could dig it,
Tiny replied.
Everybody who's anybody knows about the hideouts, man. I know where they'll more than likely hold up at, too. But it ain't got to be real. Kenyatta plays a mean hand, Cap, so it ain't no telling where he might just go.
Victor leaned over and put his cigarette out in the ashtray sitting on the coffee table.
I feel like making that trip out to the coast and seeing Kenyatta myself. I don't want to take this up with him through the telephone. I want to look him square in the eye when he's answering my questions. None of this makes sense,
Tiny said.
I understand you guys' situation, so I dig where you're coming from. But man, with the attitude you guys got, I don't know what kind of transactions you might have with Kenyatta. First of all, the man ain't gonna dig y'all asking him questions as if he's some kind of bitch. So you gonna have problems right there. The problems,
Dickie said quickly.
He gonna have to stand still for our questions if we ever catch up with him.
Tiny anxiously glanced from face to face. Kenyatta was his boss and idol. The man had put him up in the pad he was staying in and sent him the rent money every month with another check just for his food at a time when Tiny didn't have a place of his own to stay, so he felt like he was indebted to Kenyatta. And even though he knew the money for the rent came out of the organization, he still felt as if Kenyatta was sending it to him personally. With as much dignity as possible, Tiny said,
Dig, Vic, and you, Dickie, I don't mean to be out of place, man, but why don't we just wait until we hear from Kenyatta instead of sitting here knocking the man? You guys have made it to a hideout, one that wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Kenyatta. So let's give the man a chance.
Dickie looked at Tiny coldly. He realized at once what was on the little man's mind. At one time, he also felt the same about Kenyatta as Tiny felt now. But too much had jumped off in the last 24 hours for him to follow Kenyatta's lead blindly. He had seen too many of his personal friends cut down from the bullets of the pigs. At first, the thought seemed preposterous to him, but the more Dickie thought about it, the more he wondered if Kenyatta had known about the bus coming down. A year ago, it would have never entered his mind to doubt anything Kenyatta did. But now it was different. If by chance he found out that Kenyatta was guilty, justice would have to be served. No matter who was hurt, Kenyatta would have to pay for his betrayal. At that very moment, when they sat wondering about Kenyatta, Kenyatta was entering the city limits of Los Angeles. As he drove, with Betty sitting beside him and Eddie B and his woman in the rear seat, the news came over the radio. Kenyatta drove in silence as the announcer spoke of the shootout in the Detroit suburb. As the announcer described the gunfight on the outskirts of the city, everybody listened closely, hoping and praying that some of their friends lived. When the speaker gave an estimated count of the dead, a groan went up from the listeners.
Damn.
Betty cursed.
It don't sound as if nobody...
Before she could finish, the announcer began to speak again, and Kenyatta waved her silent.
There is still a heavy police search going on, but now the Detroit police are wondering how a few of the participants in the gun battle escaped. They are sure that at least 4 or 5 people got away, yet they haven't given up hope of trapping the black militants somewhere on the outskirts of the city. Roadblocks are being set up everywhere, and the fleeing gunmen are believed to be on foot. The horses the men rode where they made their dash for freedom have been found abandoned in the woods nearby.
Well, Kenyatta began. Looks as if somebody made it after all, he stated. They fell silent as the realization of what he had left his people to face dawned on him. It hurt even to think about it, because he hadn't known that they would fight. He had thought that once the police pulled up, the people inside the cabins would come out and try and find out what the police wanted. A gun battle was the last thing he had thought would jump off. His well-laid plans to call back and get his people out of jail were useless now. His head seemed to swell up on him as he thought about it. An exquisite pain exploded inside of him, and he knew he would never be able to get rid of the feeling of guilt whenever he thought about the farmhouse. Who got away, he wondered. Whoever it was remembered the station wagon hidden away in the woods and put the knowledge to good use. The next phase of the escape plan then would be for whoever got away to head for Chicago. If they were thinking right, Kenyatta would be able to reach the fleeing people at Tiny's. After taking one look at Kenyatta's face, Betty turned away. She knew what her man was thinking about. She wished there was something she could do to take the look of shock off his face. Kenyatta was taking it too hard, blaming himself for everyone's death. It was silly, she reasoned, for him to think that way. It was more than that. It was preposterous. But she knew that he would fall himself, nobody else. Just he would be responsible for the people who got killed at the farm.
Daddy?
She said softly.
Don't look that way. It's not your fault. Ish, who in the hell would have believed they would put up a fight? There was no reason for it. They hadn't done anything.
If it's not my fault, then who is to blame? Kenyatta asked sharply. Whenever the leader lets his people down, no, not let them down, neglected to inform them of what was about to jump off, there's no evasions he can use to escape the fact that he's guilty for whatever befalls them.
Honey?
She began.
You can't read the future. How the hell are you responsible for something as incredible as that gunfight? Ish, it wouldn't surprise me if Ali's dumb didn't set it off trying to be important.
The couple in the rear of the car were silent as they listened. Both of them knew that Kenyatta had known about the police coming, but Eddie B was just finding out that Kenyatta hadn't taken the time to inform any of the people they left behind it. Shrewdly, he remained silent. This wasn't the time to speak. It was something that he might be able to use to pull himself up in the organization at a later time, maybe even become second in charge next to Kenyatta.
Whatever happened, honey,
Betty stated,
it wasn't intentional. There's no reason to blame yourself for something that's out of your hands.
Kenyatta listened to her and idly wondered why it was that whenever Betty got excited, her college education showed. She naturally fell into the habit of using the large words that ordinarily she wouldn't use. As Kenyatta drove, he glanced in his mirror and wondered if Jug and those in the car behind him had heard the news over their radio, and if they had, would Jug hold him guilty for what happened back in Michigan? If there was any kind of contempt in Jug's eyes or voice when Kenyatta got around to talking to him, he wondered how he would accept it. For some reason, Kenyatta valued the tall black man behind him. Jug's opinion meant a lot. Anxiously, Betty studied Kenyatta's face. She was seething with worry. From past experience, she knew Kenyatta was worried. He felt responsible for the people that followed him. It was as though his followers were his children, while he and Betty were the mother and father. In all probability, she reasoned, it would have happened as it did even if he had warned them. There hadn't been enough cars there for everybody to get away. The confusion would have been enormous.
Ken, honey,
Betty said softly.
Isn't there any way you can call and find out what you want to know?
Her voice was soft and gentle. That's just what I was thinking about, Kenyatta answered, as he searched the streets for a telephone. He could wait until they reached the hideout, he reasoned, but he wanted to know who escaped the massacre before then. They had at least another half an hour of driving before he'd reach the place in Watts. Suddenly, he noticed a payphone sitting next to an open lot. He hit his car blinker, letting Jug know that he was turning, then made a sharp turn onto the lot. Before he got out of the car, Jug had pulled in behind him. Kenyatta fished in his pockets for a dime and, when he couldn't find one, he glanced over at Betty. She was holding the coin he needed in the tips of her fingers. It was at times like this that he wondered about her. Did she read his mind? It seemed at times as if she knew his thoughts as well as he did. Jug climbed out of his car and approached Kenyatta. As he came up, he called out, "I guess you heard the news too, huh?" Kenyatta just shook his head as he stared at the tall man, trying to figure out how the news had affected Jug. "It was a sad affair," Kenyatta answered, still staring closely at Jug. No matter how hard he concentrated, he couldn't determine whether or not Jug was angry. Kenyatta's thinking was influenced quite a bit by the guilt he felt already, so it was easy for him to believe everybody else thought him wrong. "I know, man," Kenyatta stated. "You think it was my fault our people back there got wasted, don't you?" "I don't think a damn thing," Jug answered harshly, then added, "What happened, happened. We got enough problems on our hands already without me worrying about some other shit. Red done went into another bag, man. He's full of fever or something. He's raving out of his head. While we were on the highway, it was all right, but in the city, we're going to be in trouble if he keeps screaming the way he does." As though to prove his point, a loud scream came from the parked car behind them. Kenyatta glanced nervously back at the car. "Damn!" he exclaimed. "I see what you mean. Well, Jug, we ain't gonna be here but a minute, so hold on. I want to make a call back to the east and see who got clear of that shit. After that, we'll head for Watts. If we're lucky, we'll make it without any troubles." Jug glanced back at the car he was driving, then removed a pack of cigarettes from his pocket. "Let me get a light from you," he said as the smoke dangled from his mouth. Kenyatta gave him a book of matches, then walked over to the telephone. In seconds, he had placed the call, and Tiny's voice came over the receiver.
"Hey, man,"
he said. "What's happening back there?" For a second, Tiny was too dumbfounded to answer. Then,
"Hey, my man, is it really you?"
Tiny asked, shocked. "Who the hell do you think it is? Your daddy?" Kenyatta joked as he smiled at the man's surprise.
"Dig this, man.
Tiny began.
Dickie and Victor and their ladies are here, man. So what's the deal? You want me to put them on the phone?"
Tiny asked, waiting patiently for an answer. Kenyatta hesitated briefly. He didn't want to get caught up in a long telephone call. Then, just as quickly, he checked himself, calling himself a coward. "You're only trying to evade the truth," he thought coldly. "You don't want to speak to any of them again because you're afraid one of them will call you out over that shit that jumped off." Kenyatta stood there arguing it out with himself until Tiny's voice came over to him.
"Hey, Kenyatta, what do you want me to do, man? Put one of them on the phone? Can you hear me all right?"
"Yeah, man, yeah," Kenyatta responded. "Go ahead, Tiny. Put Dickie on. I might as well take a second to get this shit straightened out," Kenyatta said, speaking more to himself than to the man on the other end of the telephone.
"Okay, brother,"
Tiny answered, then walked away from the phone, shaking his head.
"Hey, Dickie, someone wants to rap to you on the box."
Dickie jumped up and rushed to the telephone.
"Hey, man, what's the deal?"
"Dig, Dickie," Kenyatta said quickly. "I can't take but a second, man. Red's been shot, and he's out of his head, so I gotta get him off the streets. I just heard over the news about the shootout. Damn, man. I couldn't believe my motherfucking ears.
You couldn't, huh?
Dickie answered, unable to figure out a way to ask the questions he wanted so desperately to ask. Yeah, man, it came as a complete shock to me, Kenyatta stated, not wanting to give the man a chance to get off into something that would be embarrassing to him. He could sense the man's desire to ask him something, but he wanted to avoid that moment as long as possible. Dickie, Kenyatta said quickly. Like I said, we're on the run, man. We're riding in 2 hot cars, and we got a long way to go before we reach a safe place. So I can't waste any more time talking right now. But as soon as I've got my people safely hid, I'll call back and let you and your group know where we at. Maybe we can all get together out here. I don't know right now, but after I had time to think about it, I'll wire you up on it.
Okay, man, but dig this. Why?
Before Dickie could ask the question he had made up in his mind to ask, the telephone went dead. He stood holding the receiver in his hand, staring at it dumbfounded.
What's the matter, honey?
Peggy asked as she came into the dining room where the telephone was.
You act like you just ran into a ghost or something.
Dickie slammed the telephone down. He cursed loudly. Mother! He realized that his chance to get the questions that were bugging him settled was gone. He had let it slip through his fingers. Kenyatta hadn't wasted any time hanging up. But if he was trying to be honest, he could understand the man's haste. Victor came into the room.
Did you find out why or what he knew about the bus?
Nah, man, Dickie replied, still warm with himself. I didn't have the time.
Didn't have the time?
Victor repeated sharply.
Well, I'll be damned.
Yeah, man, you just be that, Dickie said coldly. The man was in a hurry, Vic. When I went to ask him, he hung the telephone up.
He probably heard you, man, but didn't want to reply,
Victor said loudly. Tiny walked back into the dining room and listened to the conversation closely. Nah, Vic, it wasn't like that, man. He was telling me about Red being shot and raving out of his head. Then some more shit about they were long ways from the hideout and riding in 2 hot cars, so he didn't want to waste any time. Didn't want to waste any time, Victor said sarcastically.
Shit, man, he just didn't want to talk, that's all. Hey, man, you guys just don't want to give my man no kind of break, do you?
Tiny asked sharply, his temper rising. Dickie whirled around on Tiny. Say, my man, why don't you get it off your back, huh? We got enough troubles without you jumping in on conversations without anybody asking you. Tiny bristled at the tone of Dickie's voice.
Dig this, chump. Didn't nobody ask you here, man, and ain't nobody holding no gun on you, making you stay. So if you don't like the way I carry myself, you know what you can do. The door's always open, both ways. Hish!
Victor swore harshly.
This joint belongs to us just as much as it does you. So if anybody leaves, it ain't gonna be us until we're ready.
Seeing the formidable look on both of the men's faces, Tiny began to back down.
I ain't meaning nothing funny, man, but the way you guys keep knocking Kenyatta, I just can't dig you're staying at his place if you ain't got no faith in the man.
His place?
Peggy said scornfully.
Ish, Tiny, we all pay dues to keep these joints open, so ain't nothing just Kenyatta's. Everything belongs to everybody in the damn organization, whatever's left of it anyway.
She finished harshly. So just be cool, man, okay? Dickie said, trying to change the subject. He didn't want to argue with the short man. They all had to live together, so the last thing they needed was misunderstandings between them. We don't mean to be knocking the man, Tiny, Dickie added. We're just going over what went down. I could see the reason why he hung up so fast myself. He's got a hurt man on his hands, plus the cars they're driving are hot as hell, so he's moving fast. He said he'd get back to us as soon as possible, Vic, and he'd be thinking about ways of getting us together, so it might not be as bad as you think. The man's under a hell of a lot of pressure, so let's give him a chance to straighten this shit out. We ain't in no kind of hurry. Victor shook his head in agreement, but he didn't like it worth a damn. He felt as if Kenyatta could have taken the time to explain something to them. The man seemed to be evading something as far as he could see, and he wondered just why Kenyatta would be doing it. It wasn't like him to evade an issue, so something must be on the man's mind. Maybe, Victor reasoned, it was like the man said. He had a wounded man on his hands and was worried because they were riding in stolen cars. As he made his way back to his seat, he decided he'd play a waiting game. Time was on their side, so all they had to do was wait. Kenyatta would have to come out with the truth sooner or later, and better sooner than later. End of Volume 5. We will see you next time on Ralph Reads. I would like, or rather love, to thank you, queens and kings, fellow royalty, for stopping by. If you would like to leave a small donation or catch up with me on social media, then kindly go to www.solo.forward/RGMC2407. Be so kind and press rewind. Actually, go back to the beginning and play a playlist or a quick episode on the go. And don't hesitate to like, share, comment, join, and subscribe to TURN, the United Ronin Networks. We are Ronin. Fellow royalty, pick up a good book, read a good story, and set your good self free. I appreciate you, and I love you like cooked food. I wish to see you folks on the next edition of this Donald Goines miniseries on Ralph Reads. Stay out of trouble, and you'll be all right. You might make another night with your life.